Lee, now Major Hurricane Lee, continues its rapid intensification process for us here. And when I say it's rapidly intensifying, I mean it is rapidly intensifying. In fact, really well beyond the limits that you need to have for this. I have the latest on this major hurricane in this video. The storm is now a Category 4 as of your 5 p.m. advisory. Winds are 130 miles per hour, and the movement is west-northwest at 15 miles per hour. So it's been moving at a consistent pace. It is getting closer now to portions of the Windward Islands as well as the Caribbean, but the good news is this west-northwestward trend is going to turn even more northwestward, which is definitely going to keep these islands secure from a direct hit, but some indirect impacts from the waves and the swells as well as some brief rain and wind will be possible. So let me give you that satellite breakdown of what's happened to really help the storm get itself together today. You can see this morning as the sun came up, we saw the storm really begin to try and develop an eye, and you could clearly make out that circulation getting going. But really that eye was definitely not any sort of, donut hole or any sort of formed entity for us. And you can see even as the morning progressed onward, we still saw a kind of weak eye wall, but definitely intensifying strong bands. That's why I put the little lightning icons on your screen for you there, so you can see just how much energy is really getting going in those bands. And then as the day has progressed, we've seen kind of that eye fall apart a little bit before really getting its act together and redeveloping. And just look at how strong that eye is now. A very strong, very, you can see all the way down to the water, a very strong eye. And that area I just circled is where we have those very intense thunderstorms, especially on the northeast side. Now the latest cone shows a major Lee continuing west-northwestward movement. So you can see it's moving on off in that direction. Look at all the M's on your screen. The National Hurricane Center now projecting this to become a Category 5 storm over the course of the next couple of days. In fact, this might happen over the course of the next several hours if this rapid intensification that we're seeing right now keeps up. And it is expected to begin making a northward turn just beyond where this cone shows. Now, brief tropical storm winds will clip Caribbean islands this weekend. On the far northern shores, we might see some brief tropical storm force wind gusts. You can see if that were to hit, it would hit the northern Windward Islands. Here we go into Saturday morning. And then as you go into your Sunday morning, that's when some of the earliest possible arrival would be for places like Puerto Rico. So we would be definitely watching that closely, but for most of Puerto Rico, it would be happening Sunday during the daylight hours if you were to see any of those tropical storm force winds. Now, a Category 5 storm is now the most likely scenario, at least initially for us here over the course of the next few days. With the models, you can see how they jump right on up. But even beyond that, really a consistent Category 3 or 4 is anticipated over the course of the long run with this system, which is why it is so concerning if it were to make any sort of impact to land, and that's what we need to get into right now is the land impact potential. Alright, so this is the GFS model for us here, showing you really what's going to be going on in the upper levels of the atmosphere, so you can see the steering currents that could affect this system and how it comes towards the United States. Now you can see it's going to continue moving on off towards the northwest over the course of the next few days. That's the cone that I just drew out overall, as it's going to pass quite far to the north overall of Puerto Rico and these islands. But again, the southern flank of these impacts will be very near, and especially the waves in this circled area. That's where we'll see them hitting the north and northeastern shorelines of these islands. Eventually the northwestern shoreline in a place like Puerto Rico. Here you go, you can see that very strong wind field, and it's really going to be an expanding wind field. Even if the storm weakens be a little bit below Category 5 down the line, this is still going to be a expanding wind field. And look at how that really combines all the way on over to the Bahamas there. But there's a little lingering front in this area that's going to begin to turn the northward curve for us here, which is what you're seeing on your screen right there. That's not going to affect the long term of this system, but it's certainly the reason that this is even having a chance of coming close to the eastern coast of the United States to begin with. But look at this very strong front digging on down all the way to the Gulf Coast that the GFS is showing, a very robust front, and this would be good. While it could bring some severe storms on land and then a cool down, you can see how it really just ushers this system and begins pushing it on off towards the northeast. And now we're talking about mid-month, by the way. You're talking about September 16th. The storm would be anywhere near the northeast New England region. Certainly portions of Newfoundland and Atlantic Canada could be impacted by this system as it begins brushing and speeding up towards the northeast. But look at just that, how that trough really digs on in and really forces this away. Now let's take a look at the European model. You can see again a very similar scenario. Really the next 100 hours are pretty much set in stone with the models, if not the next 7 days. But it's really once we get to that northward turn that we start to see things become a little bit more confused. Now the southeast is pretty much eliminated from seeing any sort of impacts. The chance is very, very low. Again, can't rule it out, but very, very low. Again, pretty high certainty for it to make it all the way to that northward curve. Then we see that lingering front interact with this and begin to push it on off towards the north. Notice it will be accelerating it as it does so, and it's really going to be from the September 14th time frame to the 16th time frame that the system makes it from being in line with Florida to being in line with the New England region. But look at how there's just not really that system there. It's well off to the north of this system as it continues pushing Lee continues pushing to the north. The trough, the cold front digging on down, is much further to the north with the European model. Yes, it's stronger, but really all that does is help push this up into New England, because it would be further to the north, and the wind flow would bring that on up. And this would be really the worst case scenario that we could see. So brushing Cape Cod and then heading on into portions of the New England states, that would be the worst case. But notice how even with that, some of the worst winds are into portions of Atlantic Canada. So I don't want anybody on the east coast of the United States to fret. I can tell you from the southeast who are pretty much in the clear with this. It's still very questionable for the impacts for us here in the northeast of New England. Now the GFS model shows a long front picking up the hurricane and pushing it eastward. Here's exactly what I wanted to show you. You can see how that stretches all the way to the Gulf Coast for us there on the right side of your screen in the GFS model. Notice how it's a little bit stronger with the European model, and you can see how that's further up into Canada though. All that does is really pull the system in, attracts it, moves it around an area of high pressure, and what that does is just force this system straight on up into portions of New England, which is, again, the worst case scenario, and even that is not, in crazy bad, and something that we would definitely be able to prepare for. Now, in terms of your wave height forecast, we could see some 10-foot waves brushing the northern coast of the Windward Islands, as well as portions of Puerto Rico. Even places like Hispaniola could see those waves. Notice how the waves are expanding there, and there's also a system off to the east I'll briefly mention at the end. Here you go, Bermuda. I'm circling it right now. You could see some 20 to 30-foot waves. That is just some huge breakers out of this system as it begins to push on off towards the north. But all the way from portions of Florida and the Carolinas through the mid-Atlantic, we could see some 10-foot waves and definitely an increased rip current risk to very high levels. You will definitely not be swimming in the ocean, or if you are, you need to be ready to get out of a rip current in that case as we head towards the end of next week. But look at how this looks for us here. As I turn on the northeastern mode on tropicaltidbits.com, you can see how we're looking at, some 10 to 15-foot waves. Even with the GFS model, which shows the system being off towards the east, if the European model scenario were to play out, we could definitely see some 25-foot waves also hit New England. Now, in the near term, Lee turns into a Category 5, brushes north of the Caribbean. The Virgin Islands, Puerto Rico, and the northern Windward Islands should very closely monitor the dangerous swells as well as rip currents from this storm. Even though it will be a few hundred miles offshore as it passes by, some rain and wind may graze these islands as well. Now, the trek towards New England or the Atlantic Canada region is likely later on after a northward curve. And the storm will begin speeding up and likely either hit New England as a weakening hurricane or impact Atlantic Canada as a weakening hurricane or tropical storm. This all depends on the timing of a front digging down and how strong it is. Very huge waves could slam Cape Cod and, as of course, Bermuda as well. Regardless of this, with waves and rip currents will be a guaranteed risk for Cape Cod regardless of a direct hit or close call. Waves over 10 feet will be likely, with the chance for huge breakers to 25 feet the closer this storm goes to the New England shores. So again, it's definitely not time to panic with this system, but time to really keep a very close watch on it, especially if you live from places like Virginia northward, all along that stretch of the northeast coast of the United States. That is where you need to have your guard up over the course of the next 10 to 14 days. Remember, you have plenty of time if you want to go ahead and, gas up the car if you don't use it that often. That might not be a bad idea. Hey, it gives you a little gas, and it gives you a little bit of peace of mind with the system down the road, just in case. Now, Tropical Storm Margot has formed in the main development region. It is curving northward into the central Atlantic waters this week. The European model has us doing some weird maneuvers over the central Atlantic due to those troughs and cold fronts digging down, but overall right now this looks to be a pretty low threat to any sort of the east coast of the United States for sure. We could see some impacts come to the Azores there, which are those islands on the northeastern side of your screen. So we'll keep a very close watch on that, but for now, thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, go ahead and leave a like, and go ahead and subscribe for more detailed weather updates like this.